All right. If you weren't here earlier because you missed the prayer and the beginning of the meal, there's someone in this room who not in the room anymore, who's turning 50 years old tomorrow. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, that's old. And you're right. It is old. So everyone, if you want to give Tom, if you want to tell him happy birthday, if you want to, just tell him how much you love him, make sure you say it loud because he can't really hear that well. In this ear. Yeah, and that in talking his good ear. But yeah, Tom's turning 50 tomorrow, so happy birthday. Most of you know it was always a dream of mine to do ministry with my dad, and it's been just beautiful and worked out beautifully for the last couple years. That joke never gets old. There we go. Did you see the picture Tom posted last year? Like, no one can ever say that I'm taking it too far. Okay, all right, so if you are new, we're thankful for coming. If you've been with us for the last couple weeks, what we're doing this semester is we're walking through, essentially we're spending a couple weeks on evangelism and trying to encourage you, if you're a Christian, to evangelize. If you're not a Christian, we thank you for being here, and we want to just have good conversations with you, and hopefully this will be a part of what we'll do tonight. And then we're going to spend... next week we'll be back at Fisher, and we'll look at evangelism specifically and some other things that go along with what we'll talk about tonight. And then we'll begin looking at common objections that you get. Grant will do a talk on how do we know God exists and what are some of the attributes we can get from those arguments. And then we'll look at the role of the Holy Spirit. We'll actually have a talk on abortion, how to make the case for life. We'll look at common objections regarding the reliability of the New Testament. Is the Old Testament sexist? We'll look at, I think we're talking about transgenderism. We'll do old earth, young earth, evolution. So common objections that you get anytime that you're discussing your faith with other people, because the goal, the prayer would be that we would begin to be... that we would adopt a go and tell model, not a come and see model. And I think a lot of churches have a come and see model, which is, as long as we want to have good coffee, we want to have good music, and we want to have really fun presentations, and then we just tell a bunch of people to come to us. Right, where we think in Scripture that we actually are to go out and to tell the good news, because we do believe that it's good news, and we believe Jesus was who he claimed to be, and we believe that apart from Jesus that we cannot be reconciled to the Father, that what he actually did accomplish on the cross in his death and his resurrection is true for all people, all times, and all places. And so if you're here and that's not what you believe, we certainly appreciate you coming. But we're saying that is true, and we're true for all people, all times, and all places. And that's what we looked at last week, and looked at the nature of truth. And we looked at some common objections that you could hear and some common fallacies that some people will sort of throw at you and say, reasons why you shouldn't believe or whatever. And so we looked at that. And so if you've got questions about the nature of truth, you've got questions, what my truth is that Christianity isn't true. So we want to try to help you reconcile the fact that can't be true, which I know that could give you intellectual constipation, but it's just the nature of truth. If something is true, it's true for all people, all times, and all places. And so either Jesus rose from the dead or he didn't. Either he existed or he didn't. Either God exists or he doesn't. And so we certainly believe that God exists, that Jesus was the Son of God, is the Son of God, second person of the Trinity, they lived a sinless life, died on a cross, that it really did happen in space and time, that he really did rise from the dead 3 days later, and that apart from putting your faith and trust in Jesus, that you can't be reconciled to the Father. And that is good news, but we want to proclaim that to the campus. And so what we want to look at this week and next week is, how do you begin to have those conversations in ways that probably, if we're honest, probably scares most of us? And so we've been trying to encourage us, because certainly we would certainly fall into that camp as well as leaders. I mean, it's scary to go talk to people, and what if they punch you in the face, and what if some guy's cussing Grant out just when he just happens to be reading the Gospel of John in the amphitheater, which happened. So but most of that's the only time that's actually happened in all we've evangelized. It's actually mostly been incredible. So 2 weeks ago, Grant and I are out, and we meet a guy, and he tells us, we start talking to him about, we were asking him some questions about his life, and he tells us, I'm not the guy you're looking for, because I don't believe God exists. And we're like, no, actually, you're the exact guy we're looking for, because this is who we want to talk to. Now, for many of you, that's scary. What do you do with that? We're going to try to help you, because there's a lot of ways in which you could handle that objection. We're going to try to tonight give you some tactics in order to do that well. He doesn't believe God exists. Then he goes on to tell us that one of the reasons he didn't believe God exists is because of all the problem of evil and suffering in the world. That how could a good God exist when there's all this evil and suffering in the world? Probably one of the most common objections you'll ever get. And so there's different tactics in how you could answer that question. And so we gave them, we answered, we think, the way that we think is appropriate and the way that we'll teach you tonight. But the point is, we had about a half-hour conversation with a guy who basically had grown up in and out of the Catholic Church, didn't want to have much to do with the church, but we had a great conversation. Both of us, he never got angry, we didn't get angry. We challenged him. We actually challenged him on his worldview. He said, those are good questions, and he left. We had a good interaction, and prayerfully we'll continue that interaction in the future. And it was a good conversation. And so that's what it is to evangelize, right? And so that's what we want to try to encourage you is to help equip you so that you can do that. I mean, we always say, like, if you have the cure, if you're a Christian and you believe Christianity is true, you have the cure for a disease that everybody else in the world has, and it's the free gift of salvation that's offered to everybody, and yet we're too afraid to go and share that with other people. I mean, we know that they're sick and they're dying with this disease, and we know the cure, and we're afraid to go tell them that. I mean, that's pretty selfish if you think about it. So why am I selfish? Why do I not want to do that, right? Mostly it's because I'm scared they're going to ask me questions I don't know the answer to. And what we'll try to help you with tonight is to equip you to be able to navigate in those conversations without having to have all the answers, okay? So the first thing we'll do, just to break it up and to get you guys talking, so we'll do this a couple times throughout. Now this is from a book called Tactics, okay? And I think I've got one extra copy left, which actually, no, I think Johnny already claimed this, sorry, yeah. So I got 0 copies left. But if you are interested, one of the things that we're able to do this semester, because we've got generous donors, many of them are even here tonight, who are encouraging the ministry that we're doing, we actually have some money that we can buy some materials. And so Ratio is willing to pay half for, if you want to get a copy of the books or the stuff that we're going through, Ratio will pay half if you pay half. And so for $7, which I think, because the book costs like 14, if you come afterwards and you say, I want to get a copy of Tactics, and you give us $7, then we will get you a copy and we'll give it to you for next week. Same with the book that we went through the first week, Just Do Something. Again, I think that was $10, so you pay $5, we'll pay $5. And so if you're interested in the things that we'll talk about tonight, now we're going to try to do this entire book in really 6 sessions worth of material in an hour. So this is going to be a lot of material, and it's going to feel like you're drinking from a fire hose. But if all this does is just get you interested in this material, then get this book. I think everyone in this room who has read it and who has studied this, John thinks everyone should read it. In fact, he'll pay your $7 if you can't pay the $7, right? He said that last week. Because we think it's that important. And it just opens up the opportunities to have conversations with people in a way that we don't think is taught that much in certainly in Christian circles. So first thing we'll do is now, each of you've got a handout. Now there's one handout is just front and back, and that is basically all the things we'll go over tonight, just cut and pasted from this training that we do. Again, usually it's a 6-session training. We're going to go through the whole thing in one night, so hang on. But that's all of that distilled down for you, so you can take it, you can go back, refer to it, these kind of things. But now in your little sections, there should be somebody with okay, never mind. Lexi's going to pass these out right now, okay? So pass them out now. Now this will just be for groups. So groups of 3 or 4 or 6. We got like 20 of them. We got more people than we thought. So pass those out, Lexi, kind of judiciously. So each section gets one. So I don't know. Maybe you guys could be a group right here if you want to pass that one there. And so what we want to do when we first start off, right, is we want you to in your groups, okay, think about this question, okay? When you think about discussing, when you think about discussing, maybe you think it's disgusting. When you think about discussing Christianity with non-believers, do you relish the encounter? Are you willing but nervous and uncertain? It scares you, but you'll try anyway, or do you try to avoid it, right? And then maybe talk about that for a minute. What is it? If you try to avoid it, why? If you relish the encounter, why? What is it about these kind of encounters? Because prayerfully, what we are trying to inculcate within certainly this semester, but going forward, is a desire to not only get equipped with good answers, but then to do something with those answers. We're not just trying to get intellectually fat. The reasons why we want to know apologetics and we want to be able to give good answers to honest questions because we want to be able to go and help people find answers to their honest questions. Because we know that if you're like, if you're breathing, you've got questions, right? And so we think Christianity has those answers. And so we want to be able to challenge us to all be able to do that, right? All right, so in your groups, so break up for 2 minutes. I relish the encounter. I'm willing but nervous and uncertain. It scares me, but I try anyway, or I try to avoid it. So break up in your groups and talk about that, and then we will move on. All right, so let's come back. We're going to have multiple times throughout the night to break up and discuss. Anybody? Is there anybody that relishes the encounter, that truly looks forward to evangelizing? Who? You can't halfway raise your hand if you relish the encounter. Yeah. Kenza, Daniel.
It's hard to start.
It's hard to start.
Yeah, but I do relish it.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yeah. I relish it. Do you want anything deeper than that?
Do you have anything deeper than that?
I mean, if you ask me questions, I might.
Yeah. All right. No. Well, I mean, does anybody have any? So we should. Both of you guys should be with us tomorrow morning at 11. All right.
Does anybody fall into the I relish the encounter, but I hate starting with the first question group?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Is that you too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's usually the hardest part, talking to the complete stranger, like, hey, you gotta go.
Hey, what's up, guy? Hey, guy. All right. So the book Tactics is essentially what we're going to teach you again. Super modified tonight, but again, hopefully this is the beginning of conversation, not the end of it, is to teach you how to maneuver in these conversations comfortably without being nervous, without feeling like you have to have all the answers, but also keeping you in the driver's seat, okay? And that's important. So there's a level of comfort that you can have in the conversation because in some sense, you're dictating where the conversation is going, okay? And so being in the driver's seat, you're actually going to teach you how to do that by asking questions as opposed to preaching at people. How many people do you know that want to convince you of a topic and then they just start talking and then 20 minutes later you're like, man, are you still talking? And how long ago have you tuned them out? Pretty much as soon as they started talking, right? Because you're just not interested, especially if they're coming at you and you don't particularly believe what they believe and they just start talking at you. I mean, immediately you're just tuning them out. So what we're going to try to teach you, this is from the book Tactics, Greg Koukl, he says this is a better way, and we could argue a biblical way, because you see that Jesus asked a lot more questions, at least we see in Scripture, than he was just preaching at people. And he was able to do that, and I think for a lot of reasons, one of which is, and so there's multiple reasons why tactics is important, but tactics can help you by learning to ask good questions. They teach us as lawyers, right? If you're cross-examining somebody, you're supposed to be in control of the cross-examination and never ask a question that you don't know the answer to, right? So you're asking questions, but you're actually leading someone down a path of where you want them to go. Now, again, we're not trying to be that manipulative here, but the point is that by asking questions, I can still take somebody where I want them to go, but who's doing all the work? They are. And this is the point of questions is we feel like, if we're honest, most of us, I don't want to evangelize because they might ask me questions I don't know the answer to. They might, I feel like I have to have all this apologetics knowledge, when the reality is you don't. If you can learn to say, I don't know, what do you mean by that? And then take some notes, then you can do evangelism, right? And that's everybody in this room. And so I think one of the things we'll try to sort of get out of the idea that somehow evangelism is just knowing all the answers and then getting to the foot of the cross in every conversation tonight. And so, we'll try to do that. All right, so why tactics, again, keeps us in the driver's seat, keeps us in the driver's seat in the conversation, and it's much more comfortable. It's much easier to do the question asking than it is to feel like you have to give all the answers, to be the answer person. Okay. Now, tactics is in some sense distinct from strategy. And all this he means if you've studied apologetics and you've studied it a lot, the reality is, I think, that certainly that we have the goods, the information is on our side, that truth is on our side. Again, all the things we just talked about at the beginning, that God really does exist. Jesus really did walk the earth. He really did die on the cross. He really did rise from the dead. That objective morality really does exist. And so if the truth is on our side, then in some sense that could give us, we can breathe, right? So it's not, I know that that's the case, and so from a big picture view, we have all the evidence we need to marshal a good argument. Now, the difference between tactics and strategy is how do I take that information and then use it in a conversation that makes it productive without just downloading a bunch of information to people. I mean, in some sense, the worst thing that can happen to you is that we teach you some arguments for God's existence, because then you just want to just go up to everybody and just start screaming the Kalam cosmological argument at them, right? And they're like, what are you talking about, right? And so instead, you're learning a bunch of information, which is good, but you're using that information in a strategic way, right? And so you're learning to ask good questions, and then you can give information. I mean, you're not withholding it, but you can do it in a way that, again, is productive and is moving the conversation along. Now, this is important, that we're not trying to do, if you study the stuff that we taught you last week on truth and logic, and you study this, you can make someone look pretty silly in what they believe. Because the reality is that most people, this would include Christians as well, have not thought through their worldviews very accurately. So most people, in fact, many of you, why don't you talk about your faith? Because I don't really know. I got questions. Questions are fine. But people could make you look silly by just kind of pushing you and asking you in order to try to embarrass you. In fact, some of you may have had that happen to you either in class or, by something like that, right? So that's the opposite of what we want to do. As a Christian, you have a twofold objective in these conversations. If you get upset, you lose. And if your person that you're talking to gets upset, now, if they're just super angry at what you're saying and you're saying it in a loving way, all right, so in some sense you can't, but if you can't, you can't affect that. But if you're saying things in an offensive manner or you're getting angry, then you're not being a witness for Christ. What we're not trying to do is just argue with people. A lot of people think of apologetics as just arguing with people. No, that's not at all what we're trying to do. We're trying to show people the good news of Jesus. And it's hard for me, it would be hard for me as a non-Christian to listen to you yell at me and condemn me and slander me and then say, but Jesus loves you. And I mean, if you see some of the interactions that I've seen Christians have with people on like Facebook, that's kind of what we're seeing, just yelling and so we're trying to say, look, these are very powerful tactics because most people haven't thought through why they believe what they believe. So use them well with understanding the point of what we're trying to do. We're trying to point people to Jesus. So a lot of times in my conversations, I'm actually trying to protect people, trying to not make them look silly, because I think that their worldview is unlivable. But we're trying to show them that graciously. So understand, again, if you're just here to argue and you're just trying to make people look silly, this is not. We do not want to encourage that at all. Okay. All right. So we'll first look at the Columbo tactic. Now, the reason he calls this the Columbo tactic is, anybody ever seen Columbo? If you're over 50, then Columbo there was a guy named it's on Netflix now, and he would just ask lots of questions. And so we're going to introduce it by looking at this. Okay. This is on your handout there. You'll see one of it says the 10-second window, okay? So pick one. Now look, this material is old, so it talks about like 2001 or something, so just relax. But it's old, but just pick one of the topics. You'll see that it's on. So each of you, the one with the stapled copy, you've got one per group, okay? So only one person in your group has one. So whoever's the group leader, pick one of those, because we don't have time to go through all of them. Pick one of these. There's a little section on same-sex marriage, there's one on religious pluralism, and there's one on abortion, okay? And so the idea is, with each of them, someone is making a claim, and you've got 10 seconds to respond, and the question is, how would you respond? Now, if you've sat through tactics training with us before, then be silent. Let people sort of understand this for themselves, okay? So let's take 5 minutes, go through that, and say, okay, someone's made this claim. You have to respond. You can't just be like, no, I don't want to respond at all, right? You have to say something. What do you say, and how do you do it? So take 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and talk about it. Okay, all right. So we're gonna move ahead. I know that we're going to give you a chance to come back to this. We're going to give you a chance to come back to this exact topic in just 1 second, okay? But let me give you a little bit of, give you the first Columbo question and give you a little bit of information, then we'll go back and we'll revisit that scenario and see if maybe there's a better way than whatever you just did. Well, we'll see, okay? All right, so, what's that? Probably yes. Why should we ask more questions? We are not a culture that asks a lot of questions. Okay? What we are a culture because what does it mean when you ask a question? You don't know all the answers. Well, guess what? Join the club. Nobody knows all the answers. If you can say 3 words, I don't know, then you can do evangelism, right? Because I promise you, there was a high school student here today that was asking questions that probably some of us didn't know answers to, right? He was a super bright kid, right? So that's a great question. I don't know. Let me ask you questions about that, and then let's go figure some answers out together. So we don't have to know all the answers. So we have to get out of this mindset that we have to be the answer men and women, right? We just have to recognize that, no, our job is, we don't have to know all the answers, but we are confident that Christianity has all the answers. So let's be comfortable with that. Let's be comfortable saying, I don't know, great question. And here's some more questions that I might know the answer to. And here's some more, and here's some more, and let's figure those out together. So, but when you ask questions of someone, instead of just lecturing them or talking to them, you're doing multiple things. You're inviting them to participate in the conversation. You're actually making headway in their position because they're the one that's actually having to do the thinking. And this is the beauty of tactics is you're making them do the work. They're having to wrestle through the questions. And the idea is that you want to get to the point where they realize their worldview doesn't make sense. They realize that what they're saying can't make sense of this and this at the same time. I could tell somebody this all day long, and as you learn this more and more, you can spot it probably right away. But telling somebody that and then having to come to it on my own conclusion is very different. Okay, so the job is the challenge for you is never to make an assertion when a question can do the same thing. Never tell somebody something when you could get the same place by asking a question. Because every one of you in this room, the first time we go out, you're super nervous and you just want to dump a bunch of information on people and like, thanks for talking. Whew, I'm scared, right? That's fine. I mean, we can work on it, right? But the idea is, in the midst of the conversation, you're listening, and then based on what they say, you're learning to ask good questions in response, and you're able to help them by those good questions to hopefully say, yeah, that's a good point. In fact, in your conversation tonight, I think you were pushing somebody and he's like, yeah, that's a good point. I have to think about that. That's good because he was asking good questions, okay? So we'll talk about the other things that it does, but mostly I said like it keeps you in the driver's seat. Now, the reality is that most of us don't ask enough questions, and so what you want to get in the habit of doing, and this is going to have to train yourself to do this, is get in the habit of asking more questions in every conversation. In fact, Hugh Hewitt has this, he talks about, he says, get in the habit of asking about a half dozen, to 10 questions in every conversation. And that's, you're not interviewing somebody, but you're just being more inquisitive. We're just not that inquisitive, if you're honest. So I'm interested, if somebody tells me God doesn't exist, I am super interested to find out how they know that. Right? I'm not just rebutting them right away. I am very interested because if they know that God doesn't exist, I want to know what they know. Right? If they know that reincarnation was taken out of the Bible, I want to know what they know. So I don't just immediately want to start bombing them with apologetics information. I want to ask them certain questions, okay? Now, the first question, we call this the queen mother of all tactics conversations, is to gain information, okay? We'll look at all 3 of these, hopefully. The first one is to gain information. Okay? The first question is to gain information, and it's something along the lines of, what do you mean by that? Or we could call it the Marty. All right? Why? Because when we taught Marty this, he just would go around everybody in all of Wilmington and just be like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And it changed your life, didn't it, Marty? Yeah, it did, because now you realize most people don't know what they're talking about, right? Including us, right? Like, what do you mean by that? What do you mean? What do I mean? I just make assertions, right? So what do you mean by that is such an important question. Why? Because it's very important that we understand. Do you remember last week, if you were here, we talked about a straw man argument. Okay, a straw man argument is when I construct a position that you don't hold, refute it, and then think that I've refuted your argument. Okay, and that happens when I don't ask somebody what they mean by that. That happens because I think I know what they mean when that's not what they mean. So, for example, Grant and I were talking to Danny a couple weeks ago, and he says he doesn't believe God exists. Now, Grant could have easily gone into the cosmological argument and talked about all the teleological and the moral, and just spent 30 minutes just bombarding him with information, and he probably would have walked away. But the more interesting thing that we want to know from him is, what do you mean by God? Because he has an idea in his head about a God that doesn't exist. And guess what? I promise you I don't believe in that God either. Because the God that he doesn't believe in is, if he didn't believe in the God that well, I'll say it this way. I told you it can give you intellectual constipation, right? Yeah. Well, I'll just say this way. I don't believe, the God that doesn't exist, the God that he doesn't believe in, right? I'm sure none of us believe in that God anyway. Because if he understood who God was, what would he want to do? He would fall down. I mean, if God revealed himself to him he would want to fall down on his knees and worship him. So I want to find out from him, what do you think God is like? Because if you just go to the cosmological argument, he's going to go, I guess there really is an old man who lives up in the clouds and throws lightning bolts at people. No, we don't believe that, right? So if I just show him that the God he doesn't believe in exists, now it seems like you're in a worse position. I'd rather find out from him, tell me what you mean by God. And that opens up an incredible conversation of him, you tell me what you believe about God, right? And that's much better than me just kind of dumping information on you, right? Someone asks you, there is no God, right? What do you mean by God? Someone asked you, it says all religions are basically the same. Now remember, last week I showed you how you could be kind of snarky about, well, do you believe, I believe they are all the same. Is that true? You could kind of be jerky about it, or you can say, interesting, and you're honest. You're saying, tell me, in what way, what do you mean? How are they all the same? I'm interested. Because then you'll find out some information. Now you have to actually be listening to what the person is saying and not just have your apologetics, arsenal ready to fire off, and like when he says that, yes. No, you're actually listening to them and then you're responding to them. So it becomes much more like, it becomes much more of an art or a dance or one-on-one basketball than it is like a Rubik's Cube, where you think if you just remember the algorithm and you turn God into you're just become rationalist, and I could just, if he says this, I says this, if he says this, I say this, checkmate, atheist. That never happens. Yeah, that doesn't work, because it's you're listening to them, and okay, that's interesting. Tell me more. I want to tell me more about that, right? What do you mean by that? And the exciting thing for this person probably is, maybe for the first time, someone's asking him some really hard questions, and they're having to actually think through this, where before, where our friend Danny says, I'm not the person you're looking for, like, oh yeah, you're probably right, and then they walked away. And he's able to use that his whole life to actually avoid the conversations. We're pushing into the conversation by asking more and more questions. So a couple examples. Someone says there's no God. What do you mean by God? Someone says all religions are basically the same, right? In what way are they all basically the same? Someone says reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. What do you mean it was taken out of the Bible? That's interesting. I want to know what your understanding of textual transmission is, right? The Bible's been changed over the years. How do you think it's been changed over the years? Tell me more, because I'm interested. What do you mean it's been changed, right? Someone says, how could a good God exist when there's so much evil in the world? Danny said this to us. We didn't just go right into the moral argument for God's existence. Wait, what is evil? Right, what is evil? That's a hard thing, I think, impossible thing, I think, for an atheist to make sense of. But I'm asking them, and they're having to wrestle with that, and that's much more productive than me just, shouting information at them, right? So you have to pay attention to their response to their question, and pay attention to it, and then you're asking more questions and more questions, which we'll talk to you about, and we'll show you how to do here in a second. Okay, so here's what you want to do. Going back to, probably what happened in this, especially if you haven't gone through this before, is they said something, and then now you just want to give them a bunch of information. You want to show them why you think they're wrong, and then just get, then you have a lot of burden now, and you've got to give all this information. You might not know all the information, so that's why it's better for me never to say anything. So try it again. So take 2 or 3 minutes to go back in your scenario, right? Remembering the first Columbo question, and look back in the scenarios and say, okay, what would be a good question that I could ask, or 2 or 3, that I could ask this person that would advance the conversation? You can even, what we like to do is role play that a little bit. So if in your group, role play that a little bit, where someone could take the role of the person in the scenario. You can be the person trying to ask questions, right? So the way you're going to get comfortable with this stuff is always by doing it. The more you come out and evangelize, the better you're going to get at it, right? The more you're willing to do it. So we can role play in this environment. We do that a lot just amongst ourselves with these kind of questions. So do that. Let's do that for 5 minutes. Go back into the scenarios, look at that and ask what would be just that first tactics question, something along the lines of what do you mean by that you want to find out from that person. All right, everybody. Hey, we're gonna let's come back. Now remember, this is we're going to try to do a lot and really just trying to introduce you to the tactics. So we know that's not enough time to have lots of the conversation, but prayerfully you would see that with the tactics, those conversations can be a lot easier to maneuver in than when you think you have to have all the answers. And so one of the things, there's lots of different ways that you could open conversations. You guys said opening the conversation is the hardest thing. There's lots of different ways you could do that, right? But you could simply just walk up to people. This is what I think we did with Danny. Hey, we're with a group. I'll introduce yourself. Don't be weird, right? Make eye contact. Don't be like freaky out. Just like don't be super nervous. But hey, my name is Aaron. We're with a group called Christi, and we're just asking people questions about the spiritual pulse of the university. Do you have any spiritual beliefs? I don't know, something that's super basic like that. Now, whatever they say, now you can start asking questions about. No. Well, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. What do you mean by no? Right? Yeah. So whatever they say, right now, now you've started the conversation, and now you can begin, which again, we'll give you some more tips here again, but you can begin the conversation just as easy as that. Yeah.
But if someone says no, could you just say, that's interesting, how did you get that spiritual belief?
Well, you're jumping to the second Columbo question, right? So, sorry about that, people. Just ignore that. Yeah. Okay. So we looked at this is the previous session. We looked at why that first Columbo question is so important. Again, what do you mean by that? We're gaining information. We talked about why the tactics are really important, and again, don't use these as tricks or whatever to try to make yourself look super smart, because the reality is you can make people look really dumb if you want, and that's not the goal of what we're trying to do. Okay, so the second question, or the second tactic, the second Columbo tactic, is going to look at this question of burden of proof. Okay, so in your your stapled section, you'll see I think it's on the second page there, but it says consider the following statements on it. It's at the bottom, and there's two statements there. It starts with say the only rational explanation of how we got here is evolution. You see that? Okay, so here's what I want you to do. So the first application of the Columbo tactic helped you to understand what a person thinks, and we understand that by asking what do you mean by that, right? The second application, which we're going to talk about right now, is going to help you understand why they think the way that they do, okay? But I want you to sort of coming backdoor into why we think this is important by first looking at that statement and then answering those three questions below it. Okay, so did everyone see? It says consider the following statements. The first one is the only rational explanation for how we got here is evolution. Then there's a question about a fetus doesn't have a self-awareness, and then there's one about the Gospels. So look at that and then see if you can answer those questions. How do these statements affect your confidence? What do you think about the phrase burden of proof, and who shoulders that burden? Okay, so take 3 minutes or whatever, break up in your groups, and see if you can wrestle through that real quick. All right. I know it's not enough time, but we're gonna keep plowing along because I want to. Let's keep plowing because we want to try to get through as much of this, introduce you to as much of this as possible. And again, remember the goal would be that you're like, this is a lot, I know, but I want to get this book, Tactics, because I want to read more and find out more about, to dig deeper in how to do this. And also remember, if anybody wants to meet with any of us about some of the stuff you heard tonight or any time, that's what we're here for. We want to help you wrestle through this stuff, okay? All right, so the burden of proof, this is, Tom started law back there when there wasn't common law. There was just, Tom was figuring it out himself, right? Yeah, right. And so Tom's a lawyer. And so when the state wants to, if someone in this room may happen to have a speeding ticket, looking at you, Kunal. If someone in this room, right? So if you happen to get a speeding ticket, what you're charged with the crime. But guess what you are in this country? Innocent until proven guilty. Now usually that's not, that usually doesn't happen because they publish your arrest on the front page and the fact that you were, exonerated on A36. So, but you are innocent until proven guilty. What the prosecution can't do is say, Koukl, we're alleging that Koukl sped. Thank you very much, Your Honor. And then Koukl has to get up and prove that he didn't do it. No. If you make a claim, guess what you have to do? Defend it. You bear the burden. So the state has to prove your guilt in a criminal case. Does anybody know the standard? What's the standard in a criminal case that they have to prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt? Right? It's not just, it's important. It's not just, is it possible, right? There's possibility, probability. Is it possible? Sure, but it's not probable. So it's beyond a reasonable doubt. The point is, the person who makes the claim bears the burden. And what happens in these conversations, and you saw this in the idea is this sort of brings that out, is number one, if those things kind of freak you out, then you're like, well, I don't know, I never thought about that. But what usually happens in our conversations is someone says that, and then you're like, that's not true, and then you just start just going off and trying to give them all the reasons why what they say isn't right. The problem is we have taken the burden of proof from the person who's made the claim, and we have taken that burden on ourselves that it never should have been in our lap. They were the one that made the claim, and so graciously, we should ask them to give us the reasons why they believe what they believe. And what you'll find a lot of the time is they don't really have any reasons. And so again, you want to be gracious in how you interact with that, but you are graciously assuming they have reasons, and if they have reasons for why they believe what they believe, I want to know what those are. But what they can't say is, well, I don't know, maybe it's possible or whatever. Yeah, lots of things are possible, but do you have any evidence for that position? That's what I want to know. And the person who makes the claim bears the burden. So if someone tells you that the Gospels were translated and retranslated, thousands of times, and we can't know what the originals were, I want to know what? How they came to that conclusion. Right? Tell me, first I want to find out what do you mean by Gospels, asking and then I want to, how did you come to that conclusion? Because if that's true, I want to know that, right? So I'm graciously assuming that they have done what? They actually come to a conclusion, right? And I'm going to ask them, tell me the reasons you believe that. You can, if someone says to you, you can never know anything for sure. Now you can go the sort of the truth thing that we talked about last week and say, well, how do you know that, or whatever. But I want to know, well, tell me, why should I believe that? Right? Tell me how you came to that conclusion, right? Morals are just an invention of culture. There are no objective moral rules. All right, what evidence do you have for that? Tell me, I'm interested. The miracles of Jesus in the Gospels were an invention of the early church. If that's true, wouldn't you want to know how that person came to that conclusion? Yeah, so I'm asking them. Now, lots of times you're not going to get much of a response, or they're just going to repeat the same. Don't let them just repeat back the same thing they just said. No, say, you said the miracles of Jesus were an invention of the later church, and I'm asking you how you came to that conclusion. What evidence do you have for that? All right? Reincarnation was taken out of the Bible. You hear this before. Okay, all right. Tell me how you came to that conclusion, right? Well, it just is. No. You said it's. What reason should I believe that it's true? Well, it just did. No, I need to know. Give me some reasons. Now, if they have reasons, I'm interested in that, right? And they start telling me reasons. Okay, tell me, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Now I'm asking questions. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I never thought about that before. Do you mind if I, so a minute. Do you mind if I take some notes? Can you, that's interesting. Where'd you get that from? Oh, okay, interesting. Now, this is really interesting. Do you mind if I go and think about this for a couple days and then we can meet again maybe next week? And then guess what you get to do? At your leisure, go and try to find some answers to these questions. And you can go back and you say, that was a great question you asked. And I actually looked up some evidence and I found, here's some good reasons. What do you think about this? And now you're actually having an engagement, right? You're not just yelling at them. And we would say that's kind of what we're hoping this becomes, because you're going to see the same people over and over and over on the campus. It doesn't have to be these one-off events. We can actually be building relationships. But the point is, the person who makes the claim bears the burden. Okay? Now I'll walk you through this. I think this is on your stapled sheet, but if it's not, usually this is the way most discussions happen, okay? It usually goes something like this. The president is so foolish, he's withholding funding for stem cell research. Wasn't stem cell research immoral? You haven't been listening to those religious pro-life people, have you? They're idiots. What's extreme about saying stem cells research is wrong? Because it's research would really help a lot of people, but doesn't stem cell research kill innocent human beings? You think embryos the size of the period, the end of the end of the sentence are human beings? Sure, they're human beings. No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. They're just protoplasm. Yes, they are. They're every bit as human as you are. No, they're not. They're only potentially humans. They're already humans. I mean, what's happening? Is anything being done in that conversation? They're just talking past each other the whole time. And every person, both people in that conversation are making claims that they should have to bear the burden of giving reasons why they believe that. And yet what's happening is both sides are not forcing them to do that so they can just continue to talk past each other all along, right? If I say to you that embryos are every bit as human as you are, what should be your immediate reaction? No, well, now you've taken the burden of proof. I said that. Now you're taking the burden of proof, and now you can say, well, how'd you come to that conclusion?
Let's say explain that.
Right. I want to know where did I come up with that information? Right. How did I come to that conclusion? Right? If someone says, no, they're only potentially human, and you say, no, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. Yes, they are. No, they're not. Instead of doing that, say, oh, okay, well, how did you come to the conclusion that they're only potentially human? Now you're actually having a conversation. Most of what you're rejecting and not wanting to engage in these conversations, you're rightfully rejecting. We're not just trying to argue with people. And if that's all it turns into, no, it's not, yes, it is, no, it's not, that's not helpful. And no one's benefiting from that. If it's a discussion and you're asking good questions and you're using the tactics to help lead them down a place to kind of get where you want to go, but maybe they're asking you questions, then that's a good discussion, and that's what's helpful about, we think, about the tactical approach. Okay. Now the other thing is, look, you don't have to force conversations. We had a great conversation with him. We went back and forth. We kind of caught him when he was going to lunch. We talked for like 30 or 45 minutes. It felt like it was kind of dying its natural death. Now, what's going to happen at first is you're going to say, hi, my name's Aaron. And they're going to say, how do you go? I think the conversation was over right then. You're going to just look for excuses to walk out. No, you kind of have to be in the awkwardness a little bit. But the conversation was over. We kind of said our points and we left him with something to think about. And then we said, cool, let's talk about, well, hopefully we gave him our information. Let's talk about this further. So if the conversation dies its natural death, that's okay. I think we have been conditioned to think that evangelism means I go and I give everybody the 4 spiritual laws and I get to the cross in every conversation. And what we're trying to say is, if you just don't put that burden on yourself and you just think, all I want to do is get up to bat. The first thing you got to learn how to do is just get up to bat. And right now, you're scared because you're thinking, I can't hit the home run. But if you can get up and just ask somebody about their spiritual life and engage in a 5-minute conversation, that's great. And then guess what you can do with that? You can build on it, you can build on it, you can build on it. So we're just learning to just get up to bat is all it is at first. So come with us tomorrow and just practice getting up to bat with people, just having those. And then you can say, that's it, great. Right? And then maybe next week you'll be a little more adventurous. Next week you'll be a little more adventurous, right? And we're trusting that God's the one that's doing the sowing, right? We spread our seed. God's the one that's doing the sowing anyway. Yeah.
What we do tomorrow is really it's probably the most infrequent type of evangelism you'll do and the most terrifying.
Yeah.
Because normally what you do is you don't walk up to a complete stranger and immediately try to ask these leading questions. Normally, we share the gospel in relationship with people. And so if you can do tomorrow what we do, you are preparing yourself to have more natural conversations that are really what we're going to do in everyday life. Some churches, I remember when I first became a believer, we had a visitation night where we'd go out and knock on doors, and that was pretty frightening, but it's proven that that's not as effective as when you have a neighbor or a coworker or a fellow student that you build a relationship, and then over time you're able to share the gospel. So we're kind of preparing you for the worst case scenario as we do evangelism on the campus, but this is not going to be really the way that you share the gospel most times in life.
And next week when we look at this is tactics, and then we look at specifically evangelism. A lot of what we'll share next week will be that. How do we even have these kind of conversations in creating environments for that? But one way is to do this. And again, I think getting over our fear of man is super important. You realize that we've had, Melissa and I had a really good conversation with a lady in the lounge the other day, and she was like, thanking us at the end of the conversation for we prayed with her. I mean, we had a really good conversation. Another guy, then we're like, well, let's try to have one more before we leave. And then we told some guy who was a professing Christian, and he's never heard the gospel before. So we shared the gospel with him, and he's like, cool, thanks. And we're like, all right, now let's go get some lunch. I mean, we had really two cool interactions right there, and it was just because we just started conversations. Yeah.
What if the person you're talking to tries to make you make a claim so that you have to prove it?
Yeah, I mean, so we're not.
What if they try to reverse?
Sure.
What if you ask them something and they're like, well, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're not trying to evade the conversation. This is just trying to help you engage in conversations by asking questions. So if you say, "What do you believe?" We're just wondering, what's your spiritual views? What's your spiritual views? I believe God exists. Do you believe God exists? Do you? Well, I don't know. Do you? That person's probably not interested in a conversation. So you can probably find out quickly. I mean, sometimes we've had conversations that have lasted 45 minutes, and we've had conversations that have lasted 2 minutes, right? You're like, this is not, this person's, do you care about spiritual things? Not really. Like, what do you believe in God? Don't care. That person's probably not interested in talking right then. So you can say, all right, cool, nice talking to you. And, it's like, there's just not as much pressure on you all the time. You don't have to force it all the time. You can just, all right, that guy's not interested.
All right. One thing I would say is if somebody tries to reverse the burden of proof on you, I don't think it's inappropriate to say, well, we'll get to my views a little bit later. Right now, I really want to understand your view. My view really is not relevant right now. We'll get to that later. I genuinely want to understand your view.
Yeah.
And most of the time, people will accept that because they're like, okay, I'll tell them my view, right? Because most people don't get asked to talk about their view.
Right.
So you'd be surprised. Most people are receptive if you just do it graciously. They'll want to tell you their view.
Yeah, and so you're not trying to avoid the conversation.
You're just get to mine later, but I'm really interested in what you just said because that's fascinating. I would love to hear more about that.
And if they ask you and you genuinely tell them, I believe Jesus. I believe in Jesus, and I believe He's the only way. And you just get a chance to share your view, and they say, and then you say, what do you think about that? And they're like, well, I think that's stupid. Oh, tell me, what do you mean by that? Yeah, well, tell me what. Yeah. So now you're just asking them questions. Oh, okay, you think it's stupid. Remember, we looked at how do you refute an argument last week. It was like one of them is not you're an idiot, right? It's terms that are unclear. It's premises that are false. It's the logic that's invalid. So you're asking them to show you one of those things that is about your argument that isn't good. And again, it just becomes a lot more natural because you're just become more comfortable just talking to people, right? All right, so we're gonna run out of time, so let's do this, and then I want to introduce you to one more tactic because I think it's really helpful. But we want to give you again some more interactive time. So again, the third tactic, which I'll just introduce, and then we'll let you walk through this. The third tactic is basically just if you have a little bit of information and you know some apologetic stuff, you could bring that into the conversation, but you can do it in a way that's not not just pummeling somebody. So someone says, I think there was a conversation earlier about if you're a materialist, then you're going to be a determinist, which just means you believe that you're physically determined, because that's all you ultimately are, just physical properties. So if you're a physicalist and you start talking about your choices, it seems like that there's a contradiction in there. And so Grant's in a conversation with somebody, he says, well, have you considered that if you're a determinist, you don't have any choices? I'm interested how you reconcile that. Help tell me more about that. So he's not just, he's not attacking him. He's not saying, ha, got you, right? He's just, here's something that you said that I don't think is consistent. Help me understand how you think it's consistent. And most people are like, I don't know, that's a good point, I don't know. Or they might come up with some reason and you can challenge them more. But remember, a lot of the discussions, just as one example, I always tell people that when we have pro-life discussions, and we walk through our arguments for the pro-life position, I think there's been one person ever that we've had a discussion with, that I sat down with him for 45 minutes. He was adamantly pro-choice, and at the end of the conversation, he was adamantly pro-life. I was like, cool, right? Every other person has been like, no, whatever. But the point is, it's when they leave, it's when you leave the conversation that you're leaving it on good terms. In fact, we're working on trying to leave people with sort of cliffhangers. Well, so Grant leaves them with that conversation. I don't see how you're going to make sense of that within your own worldview. But, think about it, then let's come back next week and talk about it. So that gives them something to think about during the week. And hopefully the idea is that at night when they're by themselves and they're like, I don't know if my worldview can make sense of that. That's when the real change happens. So what you don't want to do is focus so much on the outward and just think, well, that was a waste of time, because you just don't know. And we've heard too many stories of where we on the outward, people are just like, it's not working. Inwardly, God's doing a work, right? I mean, Linus never once changed his facial expression all last year, right? Meanwhile, God's doing a work inside of him, right? But if you judge from the outside, you just don't know, right?
Well, I was going to mention, I think a lot of people who get into conversations who really feel like they're right are so afraid of leaving a conversation with someone who thinks something wrong. Right? We're like, well, no, they can't leave thinking this wrong belief that I know that they believe.
Yeah.
I have to tell them the right thing. But you don't have to do that. I think we have to take away this burden on ourselves that we're going to somehow correct every wrong view that we ever come in contact with, because we're going to have wrong views that people come in contact with us, and they're going to be gracious to hopefully let us change over time. But you don't have to fix that person's entire worldview in one conversation. And so if you can actually leave a conversation trusting in the sovereignty of God to get them to another part of their worldview, like, there's so much pressure often that to have a genuine conversation with someone about their worldview where you're not, if you're honest, using them as this kind of project that you're trying to fix because their worldview is broken, and if I could just fix all these broken views. But no, I mean, that's going to take a long time. It's a process. It's not you in this sort of magical 30-second window. That's okay.
That's right. Remember, we're tilling the soil. We're trusting God to do what He does, and His work is infinitely more important than ours. But remember that it's not just a logic exam either, right? And so most people's objection is not intellectual. It's a heart issue. And so this kind of exposes some stuff, and you want to be gracious so that you're there to have the conversation. So let's do this, and then so let's break back up. Now you'll see in your stapled packet, there's one. I think it just says the real world, not the real world redo. I think it says just the real world. So what I want you in your group, let's take 5 minutes. So what you're gonna do is somebody take the role of the non-Christian. If you're non-Christian here, you take the role, right? Take the role of the non-Christian and challenge, right? So you can challenge the people in the group, and you're working on. So someone takes the role of challenging. Now this is really This is important for you. It's important to be able to argue the other side's belief. We've had times where Tom and I went 2 weeks ago to a church, and I was doing the atheist role play where I pretend I'm an atheist, and these guys, and we told them I was a Christian beforehand. We had this 10 minutes conversation about how, all right, now we're going to pretend, and they were getting angry at me, in the middle of it. This guy was mad at me, and I was, and then one time we're doing it with Lexi's students, and I had to pause, time out. Do you know I'm a Christian, right? I believe what you believe. Okay, time in. Yeah.
It's crying,
right.
And then she goes, "Oh, I know." And then she started getting upset again.
Because the idea is, I want to be able to, as best I can, I want to understand the other side's worldview better than they understand it themselves, so I can say, look, that's a great point, and here's a better position for you, but here's why I don't think it works. And again, it's not getting emotional about it, right? So this is important for you to practice arguing for the other side, so that you can actually step into their side and say, okay, how do these arguments sound, right? So let's do this, take 5 minutes. So somebody take the role of the objector or whatever, and whatever objection that you have or something that you've heard recently, you take that role and you push that, and the other people try to use the tactics to engage in that conversation. Let's try that for 5 minutes, and then we'll look at one last tactic, and then we'll call it a night. All right, so we're going to look at, louder, what? All right, hey, all right. All right, one last. I know some of you are way too excited to play the role of the atheist. We need to talk. But all right, one last tactic, because I think this one's my favorite. But I think Lexi was saying it's important. This gets misconstrued a lot, because I've had a lot of people tell me. Because this is so taking the roof off tactic. It's just it's another name for in logic they call this reductio ad absurdum. And some people think that, there was a guy when we were having a pro-life discussion, and I'll show you what it means. But basically, you're taking the person's point of view, you're taking whatever it is their principle, and then you're applying it to other circumstances, and you're showing that applying it to other circumstances results in absurd consequences. Therefore, the view can't be true. And so I was showing him that his pro-choice view would allow for the murder of 2-year-olds. He goes, yeah, but you're committing the reductio ad absurdum. And I was like, no, I'm showing you that your view is absurd. And he's like, no, that's a fallacy. And I was like, no, that's not what's. But anyway, so what this is what you're doing is you're showing. So if you have a position, and we can reduce that down to a certain principle, and then we can apply that to other cases, and it can get to absurd results such that you know those can't be true, then it means the principle you are arguing for here can't also be a good position there. So here's an example. This is in the pro-life discussion. This is what we were talking about. Is someone said, he said, well, it's okay for abortion, or, you know, it's okay for abortion is okay if the mother can't afford the child. And I said, good, because I got 5 kids and two of my boys are eating me out of house and home. I can't afford them. Now, Jason's 4, or he's 5. Can I kill him? He's like, of course you can't kill him. Now, the point is that I was taking his position because I can't afford the child to its logical extreme. He says, but you're trying to say that they're exactly the same. And I said, yeah, but you're trying to say that they're not, and that's the discussion that we're having. So we actually have to have the real discussion, which is what? What is the unborn? And what he was doing was he was subtly trying to argue that they weren't, and I'm just trying to show him that that argument wouldn't work for a 2-year-old. I think it's more like a 2-year-old. He thinks it doesn't. So we have to have that discussion, not any of these. And you'll find that almost all arguments for the pro-choice position would allow for the murder of a 2-year-old. Everyone agrees that that's wrong, hopefully. And if they don't, you're not like, well, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. How'd you come to that conclusion? You're like, get help, buddy. And you can't babysit. But so we're trying to help them see, right? And what we're doing is we're using the taking the roof off tactic, the reductio ad absurdum tactic. Okay, so why does this work? Francis Schaeffer says, you will see that man's rebellion against the truth makes this tactic possible. And so here's how the tactic works, and then I'll give you a couple examples, and then we'll let you look at one or two yourself, okay? So reduce it to the basic point of the premise, and then you take it for a test drive, right? You see if it would have result in, absurd consequences all around, and if it does, then you help the person see the implications of their view, and hopefully they would change their view, okay? And the reason why this is, do you guys even know what this is? This is Tom at his first, when he was in the 80s at his Jodeci and Run DMC concert that he was going to, whatever. So Francis Schaeffer, who was a Christian apologist, he would go to Christian campuses all the time. And so he's at this Christian campus, and he's in a dorm room. And this was back in the 70s. They had record players. Right? Now they're cool to come back. They're making a retro. This is like big old record player, right? Or a boom box or whatever. And he's talking to a student who's a moral relativist. Okay, so the student says there are no objective moral truths, and Schaeffer's like, well, I think you have to take that back. And he's like, no, there are no objective moral rights, or nothing is objectively morally right or wrong or whatever. And so Schaeffer is listening to them. And he's like, and he stands up and he unplugs the stereo. He wraps the cord around it and he picks it up. He's like, well, I don't know. I guess you're right. Let me think about that. And then he leaves. Now, he has the guy's stereo. Now, what is the guy going to say?
Hey, that's mine.
He said, stop. He's like, yes. And now what does the guy want to say? You can't do that. And then he's like, wait a second. Right? So his premise, which is there are no objective moral truths, what Schaeffer's trying to lovingly do is he can't live that out. Right? You can't live that out, and he's trying to lovingly help him to see that. So here's another example, okay? So some people adopt, and then I'll let you guys look at a couple on your own, okay? Some people adopt what's called the minimalist ethic, okay? So here's the basic premise for the minimalist ethic, okay? Any behavior is okay as long as you're not hurting someone. Now, there's a lot of people on this campus that would say that, okay? Now, any behavior is okay as long as you're not hurting somebody. Now, this actually was in the news in the fall. There was evidently a dentist who was, you guys know what sedation dentistry is? No. Okay, so you actually put you to sleep. And there was a dentist, and him and his assistant, who was like his girlfriend, were putting women under and then touching them while they were under. Now, they had no knowledge of it. They woke up. They did not know anything happened. They were not harmed. Nobody would have known except he was actually recording it, and somehow the video got leaked, and now he got arrested. So after the fact, they found out, but they could have gone their whole lives and never known that happened. So nobody was technically harmed, but does everybody think that that's wrong, what the guy was doing? I hope so, right? So the minimalist ethic says peeping Toms are okay because no one is harmed. Now, this is gross, but what about like necrophilia? No one's getting harmed. but you would say, no, that's something wrong with having sex with a corpse, right? So the minimalist ethic is not an adequate moral option. It doesn't seem to be. Does that make sense? So you're taking the principle, or the basic, you're reducing it down, and then you're giving it a test drive to see if it holds up. Okay, so now you've got one last student interactive, and you'll see it says, break into groups, and then it looks at the first one says moral relativism and theft, then there's atheistic evolution and condemnation of genocide, and you'll see a couple of them down there. See if you can, as best you can, find the general principle and then take it for a test drive and see if you can come up with some absurd consequences on these views. See if you can do it. Some of them are a little bit harder than others, but come back and then we can talk about them and then we'll be done. All right, so take 5 minutes and see if you can do that, and then we will come back and wrap it up. Does everyone know which one I'm talking about? Right, the one that says, I'm personally against abortion, but I don't believe in forcing my view on others. It's one of the smaller ones. Got it? It's on the last page at the end, right? Okay. I know they're super grainy. Sorry, these are like. Can you read it? In the interest of time, let's call it back together. Let's review it real quick, and then we'll pray. And then if you want to stay and talk, there's a lot of stuff that we skipped. There's a whole section. One of the tactics is basically recognizing self-refuting statements. We spent some time talking about that when we looked at the nature of truth, but that's just really important. If someone tells you there is no truth, that's a problem because they're saying that that's true, right? So we looked at self-refuting statements that people say all the time. But does anybody want to? So moral relativism and theft, that's the one we went over, right? You see the problem there. Does anybody want to take a shot at atheistic evolution and the condemnation of genocide? What would be the premise, then the reductio, and the truth?
Mosquito spray. You couldn't use mosquito spray.
So what's the basic premise for atheistic evolution? Yeah, and so it's materialistic. You're just a gene machine dancing to your DNA, right? Right? That's what you are, right? So, in what is in survival of the fittest? So the reductio seems to be what? Who wins out? The stronger survive, and look, this is what Hitler said. He was just helping Mother. Whoa, Hitler just said he was helping Mother Nature along, right? So, but on what basis are you condemning anything? We'd say even on atheistic evolution, right? So if atheistic evolution is true, right, on what basis can you condemn genocide when it just seems like the weak are dying out and the strong are surviving, which is exactly what evolution seems to teach, right? Now, there's a lot more that we could wrestle through with that, obviously. We call this the modified pro-choice position, or the position of most politicians who are pro-choice. I'm personally pro-life, but I want to make it possible. Who am I to tell some of the people that they can't do that? Anybody want to tackle that one? Anybody?
Why?
What, Melissa? Yeah.
I'm personally pro pedophilia, but I don't want to force anyone into that.
Was that true? Or no? Okay, sorry. That's later this semester, Melissa. No, yeah. So, all right. So, the point, but with this one, you want to and you can even combine it with the first or one of the tactics questions, I guess. So why are you personally pro-life? And what do you think the answer is going to be? Why are you why I'm personally pro-life, but I want to make it legal. Why do you think they're pro-life? Because and this is important. You'd say so why are you pro-life? Well, I think it's wrong to what? And I've had people say this. I think it's wrong to murder a child. And then so here's what they're saying. I personally think it's wrong to murder a child, but other people should be allowed to do that. Now, when you make someone realize that's their view, they generally don't like it. And again, you want to be careful how you do it, but say when they put it that way, no, I'm not. That's your view. That is what your view is. You think it's murdering a child, and other people should be able to do it. So the reductio is that mothers should be allowed to kill their children in spite of our personal disapproval. No, we think it's wrong for all people at all times at all places. This one's a little bit harder, but this is actually a true story. There was a lady who was she had murdered some people in Texas. This is when George Bush was governor of Texas. She had murdered some people. I think her name was Carla Faye Tucker. And she was on death row, and she actually became a Christian in jail, and evidently was a model prisoner, was leading people to Christ. And there were a lot of people, I think Sister Helen Prejean was one of them, but they're adamantly against the death penalty. And they said basically that Jesus would forgive, and that's why capital punishment is wrong. Now, we're not having a discussion on capital punishment tonight, but what is wrong with that? That was Sister Helen Prejean's argument for why Carla Faye Tucker should not be executed. Jesus would forgive, so the death penalty is wrong.
Because you're not Jesus.
Well, okay, you're not Jesus, but what's wrong with what would be the reductio there? So the basic premise is,
Never punish anybody because Jesus forgave.
if Jesus would forgive, then we have no right to punish. But they weren't arguing that she should be released. They were arguing that she should just have life sentence. But if Jesus would forgive, then what should we do with every prisoner in all prisons across the world? Let it go. And that's exactly. What's that?
If they've turned to Christ, we let them go.
That's what you want to do?
No, I'm just saying. For your example. For your example.
But that's not. That's not justice.
No.
Okay, so yeah, but the point they were trying to make, the point she was making was just, you can't, it's not just get rid of the death penalty, right? And then the no truth claim, right? So this is the idea. So the person that says there is no truth, therefore we ought to tolerate other people's views.
Is that true?
Yeah. So what are they making? If there's no truth claims, why ought I follow? Tolerate other people? If there's no truth, you can't tell me what to do because there's no truth, right? So I mean, you begin to see that and again, people don't realize that they're saying these things, so you're gently trying to help them see this. The one that I like the best, and we can close on this one, there was a lady, actually a teacher in, they teach actually this in public schools now, values clarification. Basically, this is the idea that there are no objective rights and wrongs, and we decide as a society what's right and wrong. So this middle school teacher taught her students values clarification. And they're going through this and she's teaching them there's no objective right or wrong, that society determines what's right or wrong. And like the next week or something, she comes into class and the one kid raises his hand and he says, we've decided as a class that we think cheating is okay. Now, what do you think her response was? She said, in this class, I'm in charge and I decide what's right and wrong. Now, they have just effectively taken the roof off her entire worldview because they were doing exactly what she said, and you can't live that out. And so what you're trying to do graciously is help people to see that. And we would say again that if you're living apart from Jesus, right, then your worldview is necessarily constructed with false beliefs. And so graciously, with love, because we understand what Jesus has done for us, we want to help people to see that. We're not trying to win arguments. You're trying to help win people to Jesus. And so if we're just trying to win arguments, then please don't evangelize. But if you've come to know the truth and you've rested your soul on Jesus and you recognize that apart from Him, you deserve eternal separation from the Father, but yet because of Him, you are going to inherit eternal life with God forever, and you don't have the courage. Again, like Tom said, you don't have to go out with us and do the awkward, conversations with people you don't know. It's fun. I mean, it's fun. The more you do it, the better we've met some really neat people. We're meeting more neat people. So I would encourage everybody here to think, if the reason you're not doing it is because you're afraid of man, then come. Right? This is about your sanctification. God cares more about the inner than the outer, and He wants to pull. He's graciously going to pull you along this semester. And if one of those is getting out of your comfort zone and having some conversations that you don't think that you're equipped for, then do that. And you'll realize that, man, that wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty good. And then we can figure out, we can debrief afterwards. We always kind of say, how did it go? What could we have done better? How could you engage this conversation? How could you start the conversation better? The whole point is we're just trying to get better. Again, not so we can just win points, because we want to show people the truth, right? So tomorrow, 11 a.m., we'll be in Fisher, right by the. We usually meet we were meeting in the amphitheater, but they got freezing, so we're meeting by the Starbucks. And if you want to come and don't want to say anything, you can come and just watch, right? And we'll pair you up with somebody who loves to chat. Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's a great idea. I hadn't even thought of that. Even if you don't want to speak, just to come and partner with someone who does like to talk.
We are never alone.
Yeah, I'll talk for everybody. Yeah.
So I have class from 11 a.m. to 12:15. Am I screwed?
I'm not saying you're not going to get to heaven, but I'm just saying.
Yeah. Also, for those who
perhaps may have class from 11 to 12, we usually try to eat lunch right after we all finish going out and talking. So there's kind of like a debrief. We all get together and talk about how our conversations went, questions that we heard that we've never heard before.
So come for that. Yeah.
So even if you want to just come for lunch and not come for the evangelism part, you're all welcome to come join us for lunch.
But the thing we're going to challenge you with next week, as we specifically look at evangelism next week, is this, as Tom was saying, this is not just a Tuesday at 11 thing. This should be a lifestyle thing, right? This should be the way in which everything we do should be, in some way recognizing that we're just trying to look for ways to talk to people about Jesus. And again, if we're honest, the reason we don't do that is because we're afraid of man. We're afraid of what are they going to think of me. But instead, as Grant said, you would never be nervous if you weren't focusing on yourself. And so part of sanctification is that I'm learning to love God and love others. And so we know we've got the cure, right? We've got the cure for the disease that everyone has. So how much do you have? Penn Jillette, we'll finish on this. Penn Jillette, who's an atheist, he's a Penn and Teller, he's a magician, they're magicians. And he has this, he was talking about this, he was doing this story where he was telling about a Christian who came and was trying to evangelize him after one of his shows. And he gave him a Bible and gave him, some numbers. And he's trying to witness to him. And Penn says, I appreciate that guy. He wasn't weird. He's asking me questions. He said, he was a normal person. He just really believed what he believed was really real. And he said, I don't respect Christians that don't evangelize me. Now he says, I think you guys are nuts. But he says, but I respect that guy because he has the courage. How much do you have to hate me? He said, if you believe that Jesus is the only way that I can be reconciled to the Father, and if I die outside relationship with Him, that I'm be separated from forever. How much do you have to hate me to not tell me that? And he was very moved. It was a sort of a YouTube video, and you could tell it was like late. It seemed like it was like fresh off the encounter. You can Google it, and it seemed like he was very moved by that encounter. But I think the question for you is, how much do you have to hate somebody not to want to tell them this good news? And we're more worried about us being a little bit uncomfortable than about. Now again, theologically, we can say, look, God's the one that gets the glory. But again, how are they going to know unless they hear? And how are they going to hear unless somebody has the courage to have the conversation with them? So that's the only goal with evangelism. Again, it's not to earn points so we can get to heaven on our scorecard. That's moralism, right? God loves us because He loves us because He loves us, and so now we got to share that good news with everybody. So next week we'll be back at Azalea Room. We'll have snacks again next week, actually, so you're getting good eating all the time. The people from Myrtle Grove Pres are going to come and bring snacks again. So definitely come, be there, invite people. We'll talk about evangelism. We'll do some more interaction and let you practice. But look, come tomorrow and just kind of dip your toe in the water, right? I mean, even if you want to just come and just hang out. And if you want to go, but you've got class tomorrow, let one of us know and we'll go with you another time. We can do it. Again, there's nothing special. There's nothing holy about tomorrow at 11. It's just when our schedule's worked out. So, yeah. All right. So if you're over 50, you can pray. Well, no, he's not yet. So you want to pray for us when you're still 49? Or is that will your prayers change tomorrow? You start praying for like your knees and your bunions, and does that change? Yeah.
Aaron, we thank the Simpsons.
Yeah, and thank you for the Simpsons. Yeah. Yeah, and you can help us hang out, like help them clean up and everything. I know that this is a lot of work that Cindy does, and she does get rewards in heaven. So, yeah.
We were approached by one of the owners of the houses on the street that Jake going to Hooker, where everybody's parking, and he said people are going to get tickets if they park on both sides of the street. You need to park on one side only. That's for emergency vehicle purposes.
Okay.
So I said, well, you mean that everybody should park on the south side?
You said, what do you mean by that?
He said, that would be fine if I park on the south side, don't park on the north side.
Okay.
Wait, so the place over there where all the cars where my car should not be?
Basically, if you have a ticket, you shouldn't have done that.
If you cannot park directly outside of Cindy's house, there is a neighborhood before you turn in. You can park anywhere in that neighborhood as long as you're not blocking somebody's driveway.
Okay.
You don't stop your car in the middle of the road and just get out and throw your keys to Tom and say, park it out front, keep it running. So, all right, Tom, let's pray for us, and then if anybody wants, if you have questions, if you want to get a copy of Tactics, let us know. Again, we can order a bunch and we can have them for you by next Monday. So again, we'll pay half, you pay half, $7. Can't beat it.
Father, thank you for tonight. We We thank you for the gospel. Thank you that we have been, those of us who are in Christ, who have, we have incredible, great news, Father. And Father, it's our heart's desire, as nervous as we may be, to share this so that others may experience the same freedom, the same reconciliation, the same joy in life that we experience. And so, God, give us courage. Help us to keep you in our focus. Help us to keep Christ in our focus. That you would increase and that we would decrease. And Father, we pray that your Spirit would give us divine encounters, not just tomorrow, but in class, on the way to class, at the gym, wherever we are, Father, that you would give us divine encounters, that you would open doors for us to be able to not necessarily share the gospel from cradle to the empty tomb, God, but that we would have an opportunity just to testify to your goodness and to how you have changed our life, God, and trust that your Spirit would take that pebble that's in their shoe and would use it and introduce more believers into folks' lives, so that as we plant and water, that as you tell us in Corinthians, that you will bring the growth. And so we realize it's not up to us, Father. It's totally up to you. We just pray we can be obedient in the small portion that we have, Father. So give us that heart, most of all, God, a heart to love you, to serve you, and to share this news. And we just thank you for what you're going to do through this group of folks as we're obedient to you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.